we're digging into this amazing ancient story of strategy, where a single really clever lie kicks off this massive chain reaction of war and conquest. We're jumping into the book of Joshua, a narrative that is just packed with cunning tactics and these huge events that would go on to shape an entire nation.
But before we even get to the battles, I want to start with a question, because it really gets to the heart of this whole thing. Is a promise still binding if you were tricked into making it? Just keep that in the back of your mind, because it's the exact dilemma that sets everything else in motion.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with that deceptive treaty, then get to a wild battle where the sun apparently stands still. After that, we'll cover the northern conquest, tally up all the defeated kings, and finally look at how this whole story is framed as the fulfillment of a divine promise. Okay, let's set the scene. The Israelites, led by Joshua, are kinda on a roll. I mean, after their big victories at Jericho and Ai, the other kings in Canaan are frankly terrified. They all decide to team up and fight back. But one group, the Gibeonites, they look at the situation and figure, you know what, fighting is a losing battle. So they go for a totally different strategy, pure deception.
And you have to appreciate the commitment here. The Gibeonites didn't just spin a yarn. They put on a full-blown theatrical production. They show up in ragged clothes, with bread that's literally moldy, and wineskins that are all cracked and worn out. The whole point was to look like they'd been on the road for months, when in reality, they were from right down the road. It was only a 3-day journey to get to the Israelite camp.
And you know what? It worked. It worked perfectly. Joshua and the other Israelite leaders were completely fooled. Now, according to the source, their usual procedure for any big decision was to ask for God's guidance. But this time, they didn't. They just kind of looked at the evidence, the moldy bread, the worn-out clothes, and went with their gut. They made a peace treaty right then and there, without asking. Well, of course, just 3 days later, the truth comes out. And you can imagine, the people are furious with their leaders for being tricked. But here's the thing. It was too late. They had sworn an oath in the Lord's name, and in their culture, that was an absolutely unbreakable vow. Going back on their word now would not only ruin their reputation, but it would dishonor the God they were representing. So the promise had to stand, even though it was all based on a lie. So while the treaty protected the Gibeonites from being destroyed, it didn't mean they got off scot-free. Joshua held them accountable for the lie. He declared that because of their deceit, they would become servants, specifically woodcutters and water carriers for the community's place of worship. So they managed to save their lives, but it came at the cost of their freedom. Now that tricky treaty didn't just affect the Gibeonites, it immediately kicked off a war. See, their neighbors were not happy about this new alliance they just formed. The king of Jerusalem, a guy named Adoni-Zedek, saw what Gibeon did as a major betrayal and, honestly, a huge threat to his power. So he rallies 4 other local kings, and together they march their combined armies to attack Gibeon. The Gibeonites, now official allies of Israel, sent an urgent SOS to Joshua asking for help. And Joshua doesn't hesitate. He marches his entire army all night long to get there. It must have been an exhausting trek. But before the battle even kicks off, the source says he gets this reassurance from God. Do not fear them, I have delivered them into your hands. Basically, the victory is already a done deal. And what happened next was, well, it was not your typical battle. According to the text, this was way more than just a human fight. We're told that giant hailstones started raining down from the sky, actually killing more of the enemy soldiers than Israel's own swords did. And then comes the most famous part of the story. Joshua apparently commands the sun and the moon to stand still, making the day longer so they'd have enough light to finish the job. After this incredible battle, Joshua launches this lightning-fast campaign through all the southern cities. Now, the source material is very direct here, noting that the command was to destroy everyone living there, and the reason given in the text for this is that, from the Israelite perspective, the local cultures had become so morally and religiously corrupt that the land itself needed to be, quote, cleansed. Okay, so with the entire south of Canaan under his control, Joshua wheels his army around and heads north. But the war was a long way from being over. In fact, an even bigger, more powerful alliance was gathering to stop him. The guy spearheading this whole thing was Jabin, the king of Hazor. He pulled together kings from all over the northern regions, and the source describes their combined army with this incredible phrase. It was as numerous as the sand on the seashore. This was, without a doubt, the biggest force Israel had faced yet. But despite those absolutely overwhelming numbers, the outcome was exactly the same. And this is where a key theme really starts to stand out in the narrative. Joshua's success is tied directly to his obedience. The source makes a point of saying that he faithfully carried out every single command that had been passed down through Moses, leaving nothing undone.
So after all of these campaigns, south and north, the story kind of pauses for a moment to take a breath and give us a final score sheet, a really detailed list of every single king and territory that was conquered. So first, the source lists the two powerful kings, Sihon and Og, who were defeated by Moses' generation on the east side of the Jordan River. And then it pivots to the land on the west side and starts listing off all the kings that Joshua defeated, from major players in cities like Jerusalem and Hebron to a whole bunch of others. And the grand total? The final count of kings defeated by Joshua in the land west of the Jordan comes to 31. It's just a stark, simple number that really sums up what must have been a long and brutal series of campaigns. So you might be wondering, why bother recording this long list of names? Well, the text explains that this tally is way more than just a military history report. It's actually there for a much deeper theological reason. The core idea presented in the source is that God is the true owner of all land, and from this viewpoint, the Canaanite inhabitants were sort of like tenants who had defiled and corrupted the property. So the conquest is framed not just as one nation taking over another, but as a divine act of cleansing the land to get it ready for its new occupants.
And that, right there, is the main takeaway. That list of 31 defeated kings is meant to serve as evidence. It's supposed to be a concrete, historical record showing that the promise God made centuries earlier to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the promise to give them this land, was finally being fulfilled, right there in real time. Which brings us right back to where we started. The whole story, from that one deceptive treaty that couldn't be broken to a divine promise that had to be kept, really hinges on the power and the consequences of a sworn word. It leaves us with one last thing to think about. How does the weight of a promise, whether it's human or divine, truly shape the course of history? Thanks for watching.